When I stand up, I tend to walk around a lot. I know they're trying to film, so I wouldn't want you to be running around with the camera. And also, throughout the talk, just feel free to ask me questions throughout. We don't need to wait till the end, if that's okay with you guys. And if I see that we're running behind on time because there's so many questions, then I will put a stop and keep going. So my area of research is primarily around the development of smart home systems and other intelligent devices, mainly for older adults, which is the topic of what I'll be presenting here today. We also do work around other impairments as well, such as autism, brain injury, and most recently Down syndrome as well. But really the bread and butter of our lab at the University of Toronto and Toronto Rehab Institute is around older adults, and mainly older adults who have some kind of cognitive impairment such as dementia or Alzheimer's disease. So what I want to do in today's talk is really give you an introduction to the research we're doing, why we're doing it, and then show you some examples of some of the actual technologies we've developed. And then we'll close up with a discussion of some of the future aspects of where I think this area is going, hopefully where we think we're going as well. So as we all know, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the background here because we all know this. We see it every single day, this whole thing about the rising tide, the graying of our nation, etc. And essentially we know that globally we're faced with this problem of a decreasing number of older adults. Now, because of all the advances in modern healthcare and medicine, people are living longer. And because of that, not only are we now seeing older adults living with the typical impairments that you see that are related to aging, but they're also living along with other impairments as well, such as dementia and Alzheimer's disease, as I mentioned before. Now, one of the bigger issues, though, and that tends to be a little less recognized, is this whole issue that not only do we see all these older adults coming up and then we need to support them, but we're also seeing a growing shortage in the number of people who can take care of them. So we're seeing a growing shortage in the number of clinicians, nurses, and caregivers, and because of this, we're starting to see this dramatic increase in the workload and the burden that's being placed on our healthcare system and on those who need to care for our senior citizens. Now, the important thing here is this is not only true in the institution. There's a lot of data that shows that the graying of the workforce in terms of care workers and nurses, etc. But this is also a huge problem in the home. Often we see family caregivers who spend a significant amount of their time and a significant amount of their resources providing care, also dealing with their own impairments due to their own aging or due to their own dementia, etc. And we have seen situations where we've gone to someone's home and the person who's caring for the person with Alzheimer's also starts to display signs of mild cognitive impairment themselves. Yeah, we started. So because of this, one thing that I want to stress throughout this presentation are the technologies I'm going to present to you and the technologies that we're developing, while they are intended for the end user, that is the older adult with dementia or Alzheimer's or just the older adult themselves, the caregiver is also a significant user of our technologies as well. So in all the design that we go through, we need to ensure we take into account the needs of the caregivers and the family members as well, because without them buying into what we're developing, it's just not going to work out. So as we all know, technology has lately been kind of, looked at as a potential solution to help care for these different issues, to help reduce the burden on our healthcare, reduce the burden on our family members, on the caregivers or clinicians, etc. So there has been a significant amount of work done on the use of technology to support older adults and their caregivers in their own homes. And this field really has been led by the researchers and more recently by industry as well. So we've seen a lot of companies, a lot of industry kind of get on board this whole notion of technology and aging. We're starting to see a lot of companies that are out there. So for example, Intel Corporation, who makes computer chips, and GE, who makes basically everything, joined forces recently to start their own company specifically looking at technology for aging products, which doesn't bode well for us smaller guys who are trying to compete as well. Now, the reason why everyone kind of jumps on board is really around this whole issue of going off from reactive to proactive care. And this graph was actually designed and put together by our colleagues at Intel who kindly shared it with us, which essentially shows what we all know. If we go look at cost of care per day, we kind of go from an acute care model, we can see that somewhere between $1,000 to $10,000 a day to provide care. As we move up this spectrum towards home care though, it gets much cheaper. As well, what we see is as we move towards home care, quality of life of the person goes up. And this is all research-based, this is evidence-based. There's literature out there that supports this kind of model. And so where we all stepped in and say, well, hey, if we're trying to move up this spectrum to home care, perhaps technology can play that role to provide that support, provide that health care no matter where the person may be. So far, it's a great story to tell, and it's a very, very positive thing that we're moving towards. However, this is where I'm going to get a bit negative. Because a lot of people are starting to do this research, a lot of companies are getting involved, a lot of researchers, and we've kind of been doing things all on our own. No one really has been working together. No one really has been taking into account the end user and having them participate in their design processes. And because of that, the technology landscape is actually very, very messy and fragmented in the full field. Like I said, we can go to a conference, and you can get 10 of us get up here, and we'll probably all present nearly the same thing we're all working on, but none of us work together. While we may talk with each other once in a while, we don't do a lot of sharing. And this is becoming a big problem in the industry as well. So you're starting to see a lot of these small companies pop up with very similar technologies, all suffering from the same limitations. Furthermore, there's very little empirical evidence to prove or disprove the efficacy of these systems. When you look at things around levels of evidence that's required, the typical thing we always try to accept is something like a randomized controlled trial, right? So we see that around pharma and drug studies, etc. But RCTs are never done in this area. And the primary reason is because it's very, very difficult for us to evaluate our technologies. If I want to develop a system and test it with older adults with dementia or living in their own homes, we will be lucky to recruit 5 or 6 older adults who meet our criteria who would be able to stay for the entire course of the study. So we are publishing on very, very few data points. However, it is still making a significant impact because we are telling the story even if it's on a case-by-case basis. Now, if we look at the current technology field in aging right now, there are benefits and disadvantages to the different technologies that are out there. So first of all, we know that the benefit of technology for older adults is that it does support aging in place. We've seen the evidence. We've collected that data. We know that it increases independence. We know that it eases the anxiety of their caregivers and their family members. And again, this is data. These are studies that you can read. And we also have shown that it reduces healthcare costs. Canada is significantly behind in showing that we can reduce healthcare costs, but if you look at other countries like the US, UK, and Australia, they actually show some significant savings in their healthcare system by the use of these home-based technologies. However, if we go to the disadvantages, in my mind at least, and this is all my own opinion from my experience in the field and the work we've done, is that there are more disadvantages that outweigh the advantages, and because of this, we're not seeing a huge uptake of these technologies in practice. So first off, many of these technologies that are out there are difficult to operate. They expect the user to be familiar with computers. They expect them to go ahead and be able to use the keyboard, the mouse, to program the devices, etc. At the end of the day, they're not actually easing the burden. They're complex to customize. So all of us who understand dementia, we know it's not a static disease. It changes on a day-to-day basis. We've seen instances where the behavior of the person changes on an hourly basis throughout the day in our trials. So because of that, we cannot expect them to have to go and take a piece of technology and change all the variables and customize it as that person changes. As I alluded to in my first point, a lot of the technologies actually increase the workload of the caregiver. Because not only are we saying to the caregiver, well, you need to take care of your loved one almost 24/7, but by the way, here's a new piece of technology that could help you, but you need to learn how to use it, you need to read the instruction manual, you need to set it up, install it, and program it almost, over and over again. A lot of the work that we're doing is not commercially available. This is a very difficult market for us to take research and perhaps potentially innovative technologies in the labs and to move them out. Because there are a few technologies out there, they're very high cost. We all know that anytime we take a product and we label it a medical device, the cost skyrockets. This is especially the case when you deal with assistive technologies and these smart home systems. And finally, a lot of the technologies that there are visible and they're stigmatizing. For smart home systems to be used right now, you have to buy a bunch of sensors, a bunch of devices, install them throughout your house. They're visible, they're ugly, and people are going to notice that you have something special in your home, and they're going to ask you about it. And this, upsets people because of the stigma. A classic example of a stigmatizing device that's out there is our current fall detection system. Anyone here from Lifeline? Anyone here from Lifeline? Okay, so I will then use Lifeline as my example. In my mind, while Lifeline is kind of the product that's out there, it's the one that kind of epitomizes all the disadvantages I just had up here. Okay, so we're all familiar with the push button. It's a device that does not work because no one wears it, no one wants to wear it because, again, they find it stigmatizing. It places extra burden on themselves that they need to remember to use the device, and if they're injured, obviously, they can't activate it. Yet, this is the gold standard in terms of technology for aging. And because they really have the market share here, it's very difficult to get new innovative products on the market that could replace this, like the one I'm going to show you eventually. So the question is, how do we change this? How do we start to change the technology landscape when it comes to older adults? And it comes down to something called disruption, or disruptive technologies. Now, disruptive technology, I'm sure most of you have probably heard this term, it's used in the media a lot lately, is any kind of technology or product that when introduced essentially radically transforms the market or creates wholly new markets or destroys existing products to make room for new technology. So one of the earliest examples of a disruptive technology were digital cameras. As soon as the digital camera came in, it required all existing camera manufacturers to change the way they did business in order to keep up. And as we just saw recently, we have a big casualty in Kodak. Kodak did not keep up with the disruptive change in this marketplace, and now they're falling because of it. More recent example are smartphones. Right? As soon as the iPhone came out and other smartphones started to emerge, the cell phone industry has changed dramatically because of that. It is my opinion that this is what we need to do in this field of technology and aging. We need to start introducing disruptive technologies that's going to make the Lifelines and the other companies of the world think to themselves, well, hey, if we don't change the way our product works to keep up these new innovations, we're going to fall behind as well. Okay? So it's a very lofty goal, perhaps even a dream I have at this point, but this is what I think really needs to happen to move this field forward. So the goal in our labs, and I'm going to focus a bit more specific on what we do and some of the methodology that we've been following to help come to this goal. So our goal is essentially to follow this notion to develop disruptive technologies that can enable aging in place no matter the context or the activity. So what we want to do is we want to design technologies that are seamlessly built into the person's environment, seamlessly into their lives, not visible, no workload required by the person. They just get turned on, they work automatically, and you just forget about it. They adapt, they learn, they monitor as necessary without any kind of manual input. And I'll talk a bit more about this in a bit. Before, though, we talk about the different technology we come up with, we need to first understand that in order to have this disruptive approach and to develop these technologies that can do these things I just spoke about, we need to come up with new ways of designing these things. The old ways of designing technology were essentially a bunch of us engineers or computer science got in a room, we said, hey, here's a great idea, and we built something, and then take it out to market to test, will no longer fly for this to become effective. We need to come up with new strategies and new techniques that we can take into account the needs of the older adults and their caregivers and their family members, whether they have a cognitive impairment or not, and incorporate that throughout our design process. So as said here, when creating a new product or device, it's crucial that the design complements the needs and abilities of the target user. And this is especially true when we're aiming to support older adults with dementia and their caregivers. They have a unique set of abilities and skills that we need to harness and take into account and build into our technologies in order to support them the best way. Now, this is also unique though in this situation because for us to learn about what the person wants and to learn about all their abilities and skills, etc., it normally takes a lot of time being spent with them. And obviously we know whether they're the older adult or the person providing care, they don't have that kind of time on their hands. So because it's limited time to learn how to use the device and how to build the device itself, we need to again look at some unique approaches in how we design these different technologies. So before I talk about one way we're designing technology, let me really just give you an overview of what our design philosophy is. What do we try to do in every single technology that we build and design? So first of all, we always try to develop for real-world contexts, using real-life problems and motivations. A lot of times there are technologies that are developed that don't solve any need. It's a need that the design team felt was important, yet not one that the consumer really wants. So I could probably confidently say that almost 100% of the projects we work on are always initiated from the field. They're always initiated by someone who comes to us and say, well, we have this particular client or we have this subgroup of people and this is what we need. Can you come up with a technology that can help us out? Once in a while we have projects on our own that we kind of dream up just because we think it'll be a neat project to do. Those tend really not to go anywhere beyond the publication side, but that's okay once in a while. We always try to involve the user from start to finish of the design process. And when I say involve the user, we actually make the users, again, whether they have a cognitive impairment or not, part of our design team. They attend our design meetings. We talk to them on a regular basis. They're continually testing out and playing with the technology we develop. and then become a member of the trial at the end of the day. We test our new technology as often as possible throughout the design process. So again, we don't just go build something, then design it, and then test it at the end. We typically go through 4 or 5 iterations of testing with small sample sizes, mind you, but we try to iterate as much as possible in the amount of testing that we do. And this allows us then to catch the different errors or whatever else may be happening through our design process. We try to incorporate a universal design approach. Right? So universal design essentially says designing the technology or the system or the product to be usable as many people as possible with as little adaptation to that technology as needed. Right? So whether you have an impairment or not, old, young, whatever it may be, you can use the technology and access that technology in the same way. And finally, we build privacy into our design process. Privacy and security has always been a big limitation in the assistive technology world and technology for aging. There's not been a lot of consideration that's taken into account the end user and the type of privacy needs that they may have or they may want. Furthermore, there's not been a lot of work that's been done to help the user understand what we mean by privacy and security and the kind of data that we're collecting and how that data may be transmitted in and out of the home and who gets to see what, etc. So we try to build privacy into design in our design process by following something called the PVD guidelines. This is the Privacy by Design guidelines. And these are being developed by the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario. So was there a question back there or just stretching? Now, these design criteria and these design goals are great and all, but again, going back to the population we're dealing with, we can obviously see how these criteria, using this classic method of iterative design, that is designing over and over again, could be difficult to do. Right? We're talking about a frail population. It's a very time-consuming process, very, very costly for everyone involved. If the person has, moderate to severe levels of impairment, we may get very limited explicit feedback. We have shown that we can actually run very effective design focus groups with people with mild dementia, where the person with mild dementia is actually designing and drawing things out for us, and we've actually collected some very, very useful data. And obviously there's ethical considerations as well that we need to deal with. A lot of times the ethical consideration that stops us from implementing these design criteria in this design process as much as possible. So as I mentioned, new approaches in design are needed to achieve these goals. We need to come up with a new way or new ways of being able to achieve our goals here and include as much as possible who our end user is in our process. So what I want to show you actually is one technique that we've tried over the past couple of years, and that is using actors. Any questions or anything up to this one? Good. All right, so what we thought is, well, it's very difficult for us to bring older adults with dementia and their caregivers into our lab on a weekly basis and have them play with technologies, this and that. So could we use actors to help optimize this process and optimize our design process? That is, bring in actors, professional actors, who can play the part of a person with dementia or play the part of the caregiver, the family members, etc. Really just to give us a better sense, a better simulation of what we're moving towards. Now, the key thing here is that I'm not saying we get rid of the real end user at the end of the day. What the process we're trying to see if it's effective or not is to use the actors to optimize the device to get it to the point where then it is safe and ethical to use it with the end user, with the real person who may have dementia or the real family members and the real caregiver. This way, hopefully, we can lessen those ethical considerations and also lessen the burden on the people that we're trying to design for. Now, before we jumped in and said, well, let's use actors, we want to see whether using actors is actually feasible. And what I mean by feasible is, can an actor actually portray the part of someone with dementia? So what we want to do is we ran a pilot study to investigate whether actors using the role playing could actually reproduce the behaviors that would be seen in an older adult with dementia, right from mild to very severe. And so in this pilot study, we try to answer 2 questions. First of all, can actors believably simulate older adults' dementia? That is, can they fool someone who's an expert in dementia into believing that they have dementia? And second, can actors simulating older adults with dementia be used to optimize technology before they go to clinical trials? That is, our technologies, which are supposed to learn and adapt to a person's behavior, can the actor fool the technology into thinking that it's actually adapting to a person with dementia? So I'm going to focus mainly on just this first question. I'm not going to give the results of the second question, but there is a paper that I can give a reference if you want to read the entire study. So what we did is we recruited a bunch of actors, Fortunate for us, we have two very good resources for older adult actors in Toronto. There's a seniors acting troupe out of Ryerson, and then somehow we stumbled upon a lodge. I didn't even realize lodges still exist, but a lodge for retired actors in Toronto. So basically, you have all these senior actors sitting there at this lodge, and we brought them in, and it was actually a really fun experience. It's interesting from an engineering perspective that to recruit our actors, and they came in, they had to audition, so they're coming doing soliloquies from Shakespeare and things like that. It was actually quite a fun project to be part of. So we brought in a bunch of actors and we trained them using video footage from past trials that we did, particularly for hand washing. So one of the projects I'm going to show you is our coach prompting system, which prompts older adults with dementia through common self-care activities, where one of them is hand washing. So we've been doing this project for a long time, so we actually have probably thousands of hours of video of older adults with dementia washing their hands. So what we did is, with ethical approval, we took videos of particular clients in the past, and we gave all the videos to each actor, so the actor learned the part based on watching these videos and through rehearsals, etc. We then recorded all these videos of the actors portraying their simulated person with dementia, and then we took videos of our real older adults with dementia performing hand washing as well, and we came up with a bunch of video pairs and etc. to come out with 240 videos. What we then did with these videos of the actors and of the real people is we performed two tasks. We went then to a totally independent care facility in Toronto. We recruited a bunch of professional caregivers who had experience working with older adults with dementia. And the first thing we did is we showed them all the videos of the actors and of the real people, and we said on a score of 1 to 10, tell us whether the client was behaving in a way a person with dementia would. So 10 is absolutely, this is the way a person with dementia behaves, 1 is not so, whatsoever. And this actually builds upon a protocol and a study that they did down at CAMH when they're doing the same thing around schizophrenia. They're trying to get to train new students coming in to understand the behaviors of schizophrenia. The second thing we then did is we then took the actors and we paired them with the person that they were trained on. And we showed all these video pairs to the professional caregiver. We said, can you pick out who the actor is in this pair? So in terms of our participants, of the caregivers, they're all female. They had an average age of about 40. And around 8 years of experience of a professional caregiver, about 7.5 years of caring for an old adult with dementia. So they are, I would say, in my mind, well-trained experts in what dementia behavior should look like. And so if we look at the results of task 1, and so the green bar is the believability of the real person, and the blue bar is the actor pair. Okay, so we had 6 pairs, and what you see are the results. And what you see here is overall, it was very difficult for them to determine who was the actor and who was the caregiver, the real person, if you look at the believability score. In some instances, for example, in 5 and number 3, number 1, they thought the actor was more believable than the actual person with dementia in the behavior. Okay? Now, if we look at the next thing where we gave them the pair and we said, out of this pair, pick out who the actor was, actually, the majority of the time, 65% of the time, the actor was correctly identified from the pair. However, every time we had them to pick out who the actor was, we then asked them, on a Likert scale, how sure they were in their response. And what we see is the majority of the time, they're actually somewhat unsure. So to us, this indicates that most likely they are guessing, and they just happen to be a very good group of guessers. But overall, what this pilot work indicated to us is that perhaps there actually is a role in actors in our design process. You know, I think we collected sufficient data to show us that, you know, actors can play this role, they can be believable, and perhaps then they could be used in our early stage of our design process. So what we're doing now is we're actually starting to look further to see how we can incorporate the actors better into our research and into our design processes. And part of this is doing things like cost-benefit analyses. So for example, things we're looking at is if we were to use an actor, we would essentially have to pay part of it our research assistant's time, part of my group's time to run the focus groups, and then the hourly rate of the actor, which tends to range from $25 an hour up to anywhere about $75 an hour, if you intend. The reason I don't have videos of our actors here, because if I showed videos of my actors in public, their rate goes up because of the union rules. Anyways, so I'm not showing videos of my actors here. But if we look at the opposite side of the equation here, if we were going to do this with older adults with dementia, I'm still paying the RA time, still paying my time or my team's time, still paying some kind of honorarium and travel to the older adult. But then on top of that, we're paying for all the time that it would take a research assistant to get ethics, which may be 3 or 4 months worth of work. So if you kind of take those various variables into the equation, it actually works to be a lot cheaper for us to use the actors in this process. So that's what we're going to continue to do. Any questions on that? Yep.
Were you working with PAL, Performing Arts Lodge?
That may be it.
Oh.
Yeah. Is that located like downtown?
Yes, or not?
Yeah. I think that's the group we were. So this project was actually run by an actor that I hired as a research assistant. So she's the one who found that group. So. Okay, so now I've talked about our design criteria. I've talked about what's wrong with the industry. I've talked about how we need to kind of change these technologies in order for them to learn and adapt and to be, less effort on the person. So before I actually get to the technology, I want to spend a bit of time on, well, what do we do now to ensure that these technologies are usable? What do we have to do to ensure that it can do all these different things and meet all these design criteria? And the way we do this is by classifying all of our work as something called zero-effort technologies. This is kind of our overarching goal or design criteria in anything that we design. So beyond everything I just presented, this is what all of our technologies needs to do. And so zero-effort technology is essentially what the name says. Right? All system operations are accomplished without any manual input or effort from the user or the caregiver. So this goes back to that whole notion I described where you turn the system on and you forget about it. You walk away from it. You don't need to go back and readjust it. You don't need to go reprogram, whatever else. The system will learn about you, about the user, and adapt accordingly no matter what you're trying to do. Okay? So again, this may be whether you need reminders to get through a common self-care activity, it'll provide that assistance appropriately. Perhaps it's time for your medication, it'll give you those prompts. Perhaps it's detect that you fall and you've hurt yourself. Again, it'll help you in that situation. Or maybe it just has detected that you're wandering around the house, you're using the bathroom twice as many times, you're not sleeping as well. It may ask, are you feeling okay? Or it'll call for your family member, your caregiver, just to really give you a call to check in on it. And again, no adaptation is needed to have it do all these different functions. So the question is then, how do we make something zero effort? And the way we do this is by starting to incorporate some fairly advanced techniques that have been used in the fields of computer science and engineering. One of the key things we use is something called pervasive computing. So pervasive computing, essentially what it sounds like, again, pervasive meaning everywhere, computing meaning, well, computing, right? So you can think of pervasive computing as the opposite of virtual reality. So in virtual reality, we immerse ourselves into this computer. Right? So we may put these goggles on, we may put these gloves on, or whatever else, and when we're interacting with a large screen, and again, we're essentially inside a very large computer. Okay? Pervasive computing is the opposite of that. We're taking the computing and we're immersing into you. We're not physically into you, but we're immersing into your lives, into your environment. Okay? So you don't have to wear any kind of goggles, you don't have to wear any kind of sensors, whatever else. The computer itself, because it's immersed in your lifestyle, within your environment, etc., it's understanding what you want to do and does everything for you. Now, the other key concept of pervasive computing is that this computing or this assistance is available to you no matter where you are, no matter what you're trying to do, no matter what your context. So this is kind of your typical pervasive computing example that it could be, first of all, on various platforms. It can be built into the environment so you don't have a user interface. It could be on your PC if you're using a computer. It could be on your cell phone or whatever it may be. So no matter what modality or user interface you feel comfortable with or you want to use, the resources are there for you. Right? So again, if in terms of a prompting device, the prompt may come from speakers that are built into the environment or into the bathroom, whatever it may be, as I'll show you. Or if it's a meditation or mind device and you're out in the community, you'll realize this and give you the prompt over your mobile phone if it knows that you're carrying a mobile phone. Okay? So the key thing of a pervasive computing system is not only that it understands how you want to receive the information, but also needs to know that you're carrying that device to receive the information as well. Now, the next big thing to make things zero effort, obviously, is we need to make the device smart. We need to make the device understand what you're doing. It needs to understand how to change, how to adapt, and then do that accordingly. And so we use artificial intelligence. And again, artificial intelligence is well entrenched in the computer science field. And it's typically been used for not so nice applications such as military applications, things like that. So we're trying to give it a bit of a fuzzy feel here and apply it in taking care of older adults. Now, artificial intelligence is a huge, massive area. You go down to the computer science building, you go to the artificial intelligence area, and they have 3 floors of a building with probably 75 different laboratories, all made of different disciplines. Now within the work that we're doing, that is smart home technologies, and this is not only true on our projects, but other people in this field as well, there tend to be 4 main areas of artificial intelligence that we're using. Now I'm not going to go in depth about each one of these, but really just kind of give you a flavor of what each one is, and feel free to ask me questions about it if you want. So the first thing is vision and sensing. Right? So all of our technologies, no matter what they are, no matter what you're trying to do, need to understand what is going on. So the vision and sensing are essentially the eyes of the technology. It determines what the person is doing, whether that's moving around their house, whether that's picking up a coffee mug to make a cup of tea, or whether that's them interacting with their pill bottles to take their meds. So using vision, and when I say vision, I mean things like small webcams or whatever else that can actually collect images. And sensors are just things like little tags or mechanical switches or motion sensors and things like that that may be installed in the home. Now the next thing is the machine learning, and this is essentially the brains of the system. So it takes all this information in from the sensors and the computer vision aspect, so from the eyes, and then needs to determine if the person is doing something correctly. If they are, let them go. If not, we need to provide a system to what kind of system. So the machine learning takes all this information in and learns about the person. This is the part that allows the technology to adapt to each individual user automatically. The other thing we deal with is speech recognition. And so what we've discovered is a lot of times typical user interfaces are not natural per se to caregivers or older adults, particularly adults who have a cognitive impairment. So we've been trying to explore more natural user interfaces. And one thing we're exploring is speech. Now some people argue that speech is not a natural form of communication for some people, and that's absolutely true. But it's one thing that we're starting to explore. So what we want to do is speech recognition. You'll see an example of this in one of our technologies, is allow the person basically to talk to their homes or to the technology, whatever else, in a way that they normally would. Perhaps when they're conversing with their family members or their caregivers. And then the technology would respond appropriately. And again, you'll see an example of that. The final thing is then decision making. So we have the vision part that determines what's going on. We have the machine learning that's learning about the person, adapting, and speech recognition as an input. The decision making then essentially makes that ultimate decision. Should we provide a reminder? Should we ask them to take their meds? Should we call for help because they've fallen or not? Now, before I move on and talk about some of our technologies, one of the other key things we use this artificial intelligence for is to allow all of our systems to be passive. We do not want to have a dumb technology that just responds every time something happens, whether the person needs assistance or not. So one of the critical aspects in the decision making is the technology to rationalize to itself. I know I'm talking about computers here like a person. It tends to get a bit creepy when I listen to myself, but it's the easiest way to explain it. So the technology thinks to itself and says, well, I've seen that this person has made a mistake. Perhaps they've forgotten to do something. Should I just pipe in right now and give a prompt, or should I lay back a few seconds and see if the person can correct themselves? And that's essentially the way our models work. It allows every opportunity for the person to correct themselves or to complete the action on their own before providing assistance. And this is a very, very important notion in caregiving, right? You don't want to jump in and do everything for the person. You want to allow them to do as much as they can, because essentially the whole notion of if you don't use it, you lose it is true. So we want to keep them as cognitively engaged as possible. Okay? All right. So let's talk about some of the research that we're doing then in our labs down at U of T and, well, here at U of T and down at Toronto Rehab Institute. -UHN. We just refer to it University Health Network. I always got to say -UHN. So we work on a variety of different technologies in a couple different settings. Primarily in the home, obviously, but then we also do work in long-term care as well and in care facilities. So in the home, we do a product called the Coach, which is our activity day living queuing or prompting system. I'm going to show you that technology. We also have a technology work called Helper, which is our emergency response system, and I'll show you that one as well. We're also then doing new work around automated balance assessments. So this may not be for older adults with cognitive impairment per se, but to keep older adults safe in the home. So what we're trying to do is to automate all the various balance assessments that an older adult would go through when they go to the balance clinic. So for example, the time, get up and go test, sit to stand, whatever else is being done. So what we're trying to do is essentially automate these things using our sensors and our artificial intelligence, so that every time the person gets up from their favorite chair or sits down in their favorite chair to watch television, we're doing a balance assessment on them, in order to identify how their balance and their mobility may be changing over time, and allow them, therapists or the clinicians or doctors or caregivers, etc., know how they're doing. And this is really part of our work on fall detection, fall prevention. We're doing this work. Within the institution, we're also doing a variety of different projects. So for example, we do intelligent power wheelchairs or the anti-collision wheelchair. This is, I'm not going to show you this technology, so I'll talk briefly about each one of these right here and now. This is essentially addressing that whole issue that as soon as an older adult with cognitive impairment in a long-term care facility shows any cognitive decline, their power wheelchair or scooter is taken away from them, even if they need it to get around. And so a lot of times, you know, we go to a long-term care facility, I'm sure we've all seen this, you go in and a lot of people are just kind of sitting there slumped over in their chairs, not moving about, because they do not have the mobility or the strength to walk. And because of their cognitive decline, they're not given that power wheelchair. So again, we've been applying the concepts of computer vision and sensing and artificial intelligence to allow the chair to be smart and to understand the person's environment, and perhaps if the person's going to drive into a situation where they may collide with a wall, a piece of furniture, or another person or something, and then stop the chair from moving towards that item. Now again, along our whole notion of making them passive devices, we do not make an autonomous wheelchair. This chair does not drive itself from point A to point B. If it detects that the person is about to have a collision or getting in an unsafe situation, it will stop the person from moving forward, but then will actually try to prompt them to drive safely out of that situation. So the system itself can calculate how much free space is on the left or right-hand side of an object, and it will prompt the person, for example, by saying try going left or try going right or back up or whatever it may be. We also do work around stroke rehab, which is different than the interests of this audience, obviously, but is a fairly important and significant problem we've been working on. And this has been developing robotic systems that can help with upper limb rehab. So right now, if a person has a stroke or other type of impairment that reduces mobility in the upper limbs, they go through an extensive period of rehabilitation where essentially, for about 3 months, they sit there and they do this on the table. And then they move up and they do this with the thumb. And then they may get something heavy and they start doing this, until the point they can get the mobility in order to do real kind of functional activities. Now obviously that's very difficult rehab exercise to do because it's boring, and it's actually very labor intensive because you need a therapist there to guide the person to do it, provide resistance on them to give them a little strength workout, and also really to motivate them to do it. So in the literature, there's a lot of people who do robotics to do this. They've been making these kind of tabletop robots or standing robots, which essentially allows me to exercise. And it provides force feedback to increase the strength, etc. It's essentially a very fancy piece of exercise equipment. Now the problem with existing robots that are out there, I'm not going to get too much into that, I don't want to digress too much from the topic here, but a big problem with these robotic devices is they suffer from a lot of the limitations that I presented before for technology and aging. Primarily, there's not a lot out there, and they're very, very expensive. You're looking at the range of $100,000 or more for one of these rehab robots. So what we're trying to do is to make a device under $10,000 that'll be cheap enough that the hospital can buy them, but essentially make then a consumer version for under $500, which is almost an disposable robot, disposable robot that someone can buy and then throw out when they don't exercise. The final thing we do are devices to help the nursing staff and the clinicians as well. So these are things, for example, like PDAs or smartphones or whatever it may be, that can help them do their job more efficiently, more safely. So we're working on one project right now, Toronto Rehab, where we're developing a device that uses ambient displays. That is a display that is anywhere in the room. Essentially using this concept of pervasive computing, but for displaying information. And what the technology will hopefully do is, as soon as the nurse or the doctor walks into the patient room, it will recognize who the nurse or the clinician or the doctor is, who the patient is, and will automatically start displaying information. And this information can be displayed on a handheld device, an iPad, a big screen that may be on the wall, or whatever it may be. And this is really to help, again, the clinicians to do their job more safely, more efficiently. For example, the system will know it's time for meds. It will automatically display the information. Or primarily this help in the sharing of information. So for example, the doctor may be there, may be looking at the lab results on his PDA right now, and they'd like to share some of that information with the patient and family member. At that point, the doctor can say, well, I want to see this aspect of the clinical results, and I want to display it on the wall there, and that information gets displayed and then shared with the family member. So beyond a safety technology, it's also a communication technology as well that we're working on. All right, so what I want to do is now focus on two specific technologies that are for the home. And the first one is the coach prompting system. So the coach is an intelligent cognitive device that can track the user through any type of activity of living, or essentially any kind of self-care activity or whatever it may be that has a sequence of steps to follow, and it provides cues or prompts when necessary. Okay? And again, in a passive way. So the coach, this is actually, can you see those pictures okay?
It'd be helpful to dim the lights a bit, I think.
There's a light switch right
The light is behind the projection screen.
there. That help?
Yeah.
So this is actually an installation of the coach that just happened at a private clinic at Leslie for one called the Toronto Memory Program. So we've installed this in their washrooms now for their clients. And what you see here, there's primarily two components. So there's this screen here, you've ever seen here, which displays the prompts. And the prompts can be given either as a verbal or a visual prompt, so maybe a video, a picture, etc. I'll talk about that in a few seconds. The other component then is the sensor. So this is a small webcam that tracks what the person is doing, as I'll show you, and it lets the system know what objects they're interacting with, which steps they may have missed, or whatever else. Now the key thing here is there's no human operator here. While we're using a camera, there's no images actually being transmitted anywhere, being viewed by anyone, etc. The image is taken by the computer, analyzed, and then the image is dumped, and all the computer system is data. Right. So the coach system actually is made up of 3 different modules, and I'll talk about each one right now, and then I'll show you a video of the system in action. So the first thing it says is the tracking module, and that uses the camera. So the important thing for the system to understand is what is the person doing within the activity of daily living. In this particular case, hand washing as an example. We're also currently expanding this now to toothbrushing, dressing, nutrition, and well, making a cup of tea. I guess that fits within nutrition. The making a cup of tea is with, surprisingly, collaborators in the UK. We said to them, what's the most important task you want us to work on? They said making tea. So we're working on that too. But I'll show you this hand washing at this point. So using the computer vision, the small camera, we can actually track the location of the person's hands and what objects they're interacting with. So it would know my hand is here, then it would know that I'm picking up this cup, etc. And the critical thing here again is that whole zero effort concept. We do not require any markers, any bracelets, nothing special worn on the person. It's all based on skin color and the shape of our hands. So anyone can walk in to start using the system and it'll start tracking your hands and the objects you're working with, etc. So the tracking takes the hand positions and the object positions, what objects are being interacted with, and passes on to the planning module. And this is where the machine learning and the decision making happens. So the planning module will take the input from the tracker and say, okay, I see the person is about to turn off the water. And it'll then rationalize to itself and look into its various libraries and models of hand washing and say, well, based on what the person has already done and what needs to happen, should they be turning off the water? And at that point, it's going to make a decision as to whether the person is doing the correct thing or not. If it determines that the person is not doing the correct action, so turning off the water is not the appropriate thing to be doing at this point in time, it then goes to the prompting module. And the prompting module then determines, well, what level of assistance or type of assistance should we give to the person? And the assistance can range from giving nothing at all, which is the choice of action always of the system. The system, essentially the way that the artificial intelligence system works is we give it rewards, or we give it a cost or a penalty every time it makes a decision. So if it starts to prompt the person a lot and badgers the person, essentially, it gets a lot of penalties. However, if it leaves the person alone, doesn't say a word, and the person successfully completes the activity, it's given a very high reward. So just like anything in life, including ourselves or whatever it may be, we basically perform actions that give us the maximum reward or benefit. The system does the exact same thing. So its first choice is actually to do nothing. But if it determines that really doing nothing is not going to help this person, they're just going to continue to go down the wrong sequence of steps and go down the wrong path, at that point it'll provide a prompt. Now the technology can actually learn what type of prompt is most effective with each person that uses the technology. The prompts can range from very general verbal prompts such as dry your hands or turn off the water, to more specific ones such as addressing a person by name, describing the object they need to use, or providing a video or a picture showing them or demonstrating them how to complete the activity. And again, this adapts over time. So if the person's condition worsens, it would actually start to increase the level of prompting if needed. But if the person starts to get better, and they start to perhaps relearn the activity, then the prompts would actually start getting less to the point where, again, the system would remain completely silent. And obviously, the big aspect is the human part. So we actually don't cut out the human caregiver completely. With this technology, the caregiver would be carrying some kind of little device, and maybe a smartphone at this point, and if the technology prompts and prompts and prompts and the person's still not responding, then it actually puts out a text message or a call to the caregiver saying, you know, Mr. Smith is stuck on this step, he's not responding to the technology, please come in and help him out. So what I'll show you now is a quick video of the technology working, and then we'll talk about it.
You're doing great.
Thank you.
The knobs to turn the water off.
All right, yes. Oh gosh, this is good.
Alright, so that was just one small snippet from a recent trial that we did, and I'll show you some results from that trial in a second. But the interesting things here that happened, essentially, she always got stuck in that same step of kind of that rinsing. So she'd just sit there and play with the water and just kind of sit there and look at it. So the technology realized this and provided her a prompt. Now the fact that she always got stuck on this, and this is probably about 10 days into the trial, so 10 days of learning about the person, the system jumps in quicker every single time. If this was day one and the system observed this, it would probably hang back a lot more in terms of providing a prompt. The next thing is, over this time, it actually learned that she always needed that video prompt, always needed to be addressed by name to get this step done. Now, whether it's the video that helped her get the step done, or the fact that the video just draw her attention back to the sink to get the step done, we don't know the answer to that. But when we just gave her a verbal prompt, she would never attend to it and complete the activity. So the system now starts her off with the video prompts and addressing her name. The last interesting thing you notice is how she had a conversation with the technology. This was just not observed with her. We actually saw this across all of our clients. They would have these back and forth conversations with the system. And the current version does not have the speech recognition interface. So when the person said something to the technology was not able to respond back appropriately. And this was actually the primary source of frustration in all of our clients. So for example, the person, the system would say, dry your hands or use a towel, and the client would respond back saying, like, what was that, or where's the towel? And the system wouldn't respond back. And a lot of times we would see some of the clients say things back to the technology, like, oh, like now you decide not to say something, or they would say other things I can't repeat here because we're coding. But it really was frustrating to them that they couldn't have this back and forth conversation as they expected to happen. And so because of that, now we're working on the speech recognition component to make this just a little more natural in the way that it, as natural it can be possible, having a voice coming from the walls and stuff. But as natural as possible, as they would expect that they would have with their caregiver, family member, if they're in the washroom. Yep.
Did you ever see an aggressive response or a frightful response? Because I can imagine that this voice coming out of nowhere, it's hard enough when you connect physically with a human being, but to have this voice come out of nowhere, that would elicit a pretty interesting response in some patients.
Yeah, we totally expect that to happen when we started this a long time ago, but we actually have never seen the case. Amazingly, a lot of them just think that it's the radio or it's the television or it's someone from outside the room yelling in instructions to them, which we're all used to having happen to us. People yelling things at us. So we never actually had a negative response, which totally surprised me at this point. But saying that, I think it's because we've always had very specific inclusion criteria in our studies and exclusion criteria. So we would exclude people who may have suffered from deliria and other kind of aggressive or other aggressive behaviors as well. So because of that, we may not have had those individuals as part of our studies that would have maybe responded that way, which I think also speaks to the important thing about these technologies, not just this one, but all of them, that we're not saying this is a blanket solution for everyone. We need to be very careful in determining who would actually respond and have the most benefit from this kind of smart home technology and who would not, and who really needs that care from an actual person. So I think that's one thing that we're starting to look at as well in terms of how do we come up with a very simple tool that determines who would benefit from technology and who wouldn't.
I'm interested in the speech recognition part because I know that, today's speech recognition, which is, quite good, doesn't use any kind of artificial intelligence at all. It's all statistical modeling, mathematical modeling.
Yeah.
And under those kind of conditions, would not be particularly effective because of all the background sound. The radio in the background, the sound of the running water, which is like white or pink or purple noise or something, because the systems can't, the accuracy is only as accurate as the signal, and all those sonic signals are mixed in together.
Yeah, so we're doing quite a bit of research now. So I have a postdoctoral fellow and a PhD student who are just working specific on speech recognition. kind of in these naturalistic environments with a lot of this background noise. So they're coming up with a lot of interesting techniques to filter out all the background noise, just focus on the signal of the voice. Now, you'll see speech recognition again in our fall detection, but I'll talk about it quickly right now, is one of the other big limitations are all speech recognition systems right now is things like, if you ever use, want to do automatic dictation or whatever else on your computer, they're all tuned to young, healthy voices, and not to older adults who may have a change in their vocal cords, a change in the way they speak, or perhaps accents, etc. So what we've actually done is we've gone ahead, we've collected our own data set of older adult voices. So we brought a bunch of older adult actors into our sound booth, and we collected a bunch of speech samples. Is that a question or is that a...
It's a question.
Okay. I have till 1:30, right? So we collected all these voice samples just so we can train these systems to work with older adult voices. Now the reason we brought actors in is because we also wanted to get voice samples of people in distress or injuries for our fall detection. Now obviously we can't bring someone in our sound booth, whack them in the knee and say, okay, now say this word for us, right? So again, we brought the actors in that case to help mimic those kind of situations. So,
My question was just, all these videos that you're doing are obviously under analysis. So like you said before, it's not like these data are being translated to anyone who's supervising these activities. So in terms of follow-up, how do you know that the person is actually benefiting from this technology?
Right. So in terms of a trial, we do keep the video that you see here.
Right.
And what we do is we actually go through and we manually annotate every single video. So from the technology perspective, to one, understand the technology is working, what that requires is some poor summer student normally sits there and annotates every single frame of video to say where the person's hands are, what step they're doing, what their level of confusion may be, what they're trying to do, and then we compare that with every single frame decision that the system makes. Now, if we look at a 2-minute video, we're probably talking about 300,000 frames that we're going through. So we manually annotate every single piece of data. Same thing then from the clinical perspective. We see, okay, well, we watch them do hand washing or toothbrushing. We say, okay, well, the person has had trouble at this step. This was what they did. This is the kind of response. And then we see how the system responded to it to determine whether it made sure that gave them an appropriate prompt or not. Yep.
How does this system adapt to vision and speech impairment?
So that's a good question. So right now in terms of the speech impairment, that's being taken into consideration of our speech recognition stuff that we're working on. In terms of vision, if the person has poor vision, the system would know not to provide a video. It would just stick with the verbal prompts.
Is that an adaptation that you would build into their specific system?
Yeah, so that would be just kind of an initial setup. We would say no visual prompts that would be given. I'll take one more question on that.
I can see the advantage of the positive reinforcement, because when you're a caregiver all the time, and judgment comes into your voice, like, turn off the taps.
Yeah. Yeah. So positive reinforcement was something we actually did not include in initial systems. And even in this one, it's very limited, the positive
She
reinforcement.
appreciates it.
And the reason we did that is we took a very academic approach to that point. And we kind of talked to caregivers and talked to specialists in speech language pathology, and they're all saying, oh no, nothing to distract the person from the task. That includes positive reinforcement. And we started moving away from that. We don't believe that's true anymore. So we're starting to build more positive reinforcement into the system itself. So. All right, so I'm going to move on here. And what I'm going to show you now is some results from the study that we conducted. So I'm just going to give you a quick snapshot. And so what we did in our study is we did a single subject research design. So essentially each subject performed hand washing as they typically would, so no technology. And we looked at how many steps they were able to complete. So in hand washing, there's 5 steps that were recorded. So on average, without the technology, over all the subjects, they're able to do anywhere from 4.5 steps on their own for hand washing. Now, in terms of if you look at the range, we would have clients who would only be doing 1 step on their own, 2 subjects who were perfect. So we actually had quite a large variation in the data. When we then introduced the technology, at this point then, on average, we saw typically perfect performance in hand washing. So that is, they were able to complete the step totally on their own or in response to the technology. The caregivers were not coming into the room. When we then removed the technology, we saw their performance drop, and then again, when we introduced, we see again this perfect performance with the technology. I don't have the caregiver data here, but in general, what we saw is on average, the caregivers were spending about 8 to 10 minutes in the washroom with every single client to do hand washing. With the technology, this was under 30 seconds on average. Now, in terms of the system performance, so that is how well did it recognize what the person is doing and provide the appropriate prompt? It was okay. We had a sensitivity of 89%. So that is 89% of the time it correctly identified that a mistake was made and provided a prompt. 74% of the time it correctly identified that no mistake was made and stayed quiet. So we had a 25% false alarm rate actually. So that is 25% of the time it gave prompts that were not necessary. Now, thankfully, we didn't see a lot of confusion being added to the person based on these false alarms. A lot of times they would hear the prompt and they would just normally ignore it, or sometimes they would actually follow the prompt and just repeat the step, which was okay for us. But this is not acceptable. If we're going to make this a home-based product that everyone's going to be using in the home, okay, whether they're cognitively impaired or not, we expect the system to know that no mistakes are being made and to remain quiet. Because if you can walk in, you can wash your hands or brush your teeth appropriately, you don't want this system telling you, hey, you use the soap or turn off the water. You're going to get very annoyed. And as a caregiver family, you're going to be the ones going to take the technology out and throw it away. So that's something we're working on. So in terms of new work around Coach, as I said, we're expanding to another ADL. We're now doing this installation in actual homes and in the Toronto Memory Program, so we want to do a 24/7 deployment. So up to this point, we've been doing trials where it's being very controlled. We can turn the system off, on and off every day, and being in there and doing whatever we need to do. At the Toronto Memory Program and soon in people's homes, this will be running 24 hours a day now to see how well it operates over the long term. And obviously, we're trying to move this towards commercialization. Any questions about Coach before I move to Helper? You have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if it's only one client specific, or do you have multi-user systems?
Yeah, so the one in Toronto Memory Program is a multi-user device, because there we don't know who's coming to the washroom. It's all their clients, so that's one thing we're testing right now in the system. Oh, yep.
In that context, does the system adapt, or does it have a way to detect individuals, or is it just user independent?
Yeah. So what we're trying to test in this version is whether we can come up with one model that generalizes enough that we don't have to identify each individual person. So the one thing that loses, obviously, is we can't say, John, try using the soap. So we've gotten rid of the name from the problem. We're going to see how that works. The reason why we're testing that theory is to see whether we can make the technology development a lot easier, obviously. If we can come up with one generalized system that will just learn and can be adapted to anyone, then that's the best way to go. I'm not 100% confident or sure that's going to work. I think we're probably going to stick with individualized systems, which is going to have to understand who the person is, etc. And that's fine, because when we install this in people's homes, it's probably just going to be the one person that's going to be requiring the technology anyway. And in theory, anyone who doesn't have dementia should be washing their hands properly. We've seen some situations where people don't. And so the system should remain quiet and not give prompts anyway.
Is facial recognition something that could be built into a system like this?
It could be. We're looking at facial recognition as part of some of our other projects. Facial recognition is not great in noisy environments, though. Right? It has to be very kind of good, solid lighting, very uncluttered background, etc. So I'm not sure how well that would work in this situation. So it's something that we're going to explore. Okay, so the second technology I'm going to present to you is the helper. So this is our emergency response system. And this is actually a view through the window of our new lab down in Toronto Rehab called Home Lab. So what this is a fully operational house inside a hospital. So the house itself has a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living room, etc. Everything works. Everything is plumbed. So in theory, people could live there on a short-term basis. But what it doesn't have is a ceiling on it. You kind of see it open here. So we have these fake kind of ceiling tiles that we hang down in order to install our various technologies. And this home lab is available for anyone to come tour and come see if anyone's interested in the work that we're doing. Just feel free to contact me. So this is our fall detection system, and this is someone who's not a real person, an actor here pretending to fall for us to test our system. And this product has come out of the limitations I spoke about before with the current push-button system. Okay? So we know that they're ineffective. The companies themselves have said to us 75% of our clients do not wear the push button. 75% of the people who do wear the button never push it for some reason, or a variety of reasons. And because of that, we want to come up with a more effective solution to overcome that situation. So what we've done, again, is we've taken the whole concept of artificial intelligence and sensing, we've tried to apply it to a technology that can detect falls in emergency situations without the need of that push button. Again, the whole notion of zero effort technology. So this is what our current prototype looks like. It's a device that's about this big by about this big that sits on the ceiling. And within this device is all the components that's required. There's a small computer in there, a small camera, a speaker, a microphone, and even a smoke detector. Okay, so it's kind of our all-in-one emergency device. And the system works very similar to how Coach works in terms of various components and the algorithms or software that we've developed. So again, we use a small webcam to capture the images. Again, no one is viewing these images. There's no privacy concern here. And what we do, instead of just tracking the hands and the objects that the person is interacting with, we actually track the entire body. So we can track the person as they move throughout their house, actually classify the type of postures that they're in. So in the health monitor, this is where we look at the occupant dynamic. So we can classify if the person is standing up, if they're crouched over tying their shoe or picking something up, or if they've fallen on the ground. Okay. So based on this posture, we can detect if a fall has happened. So it's not actually the fall itself that we're detecting, but the posture of the fall, which makes this a lot easier and safer for us to test because I don't need to be pushing my students over onto the ground. They can just go lie gently down. Yep.
So what happens if someone's doing normal things like washing the floor or something?
Right. So that's a good point. So there's other features or characteristics built into the occupant dynamic model. So it's just not the posture, but we look at things like the motion. So for example, if the person's on the ground and doing a lot of motion, we assume that a fall is not happening. Maybe they're down there washed for crawling around, etc. The other thing we also can do is we can annotate the environment on setup. So as soon as we set this device up, we can go and say, this is the bed, this is the sofa, this is their favorite chair, whatever else. So this tells the system that if it sees the person in a fallen position, but they're within the sofa area, then they haven't fallen. They're most likely just lying down. What this also does for us is this long-term behavior analysis. So what we're trying to do now is not only detect falls, but also look at changes over time. So we can detect how many times a person goes to the bathroom, how many times, or how long they sleep for, when do they typically lie on the sofa, when do they leave the house, etc. We can build a schedule of what they're doing. By looking for changes and deviations in those patterns, then we can actually detect if there's a change in their overall health. And what we're trying to do now as part of a PhD project is determine by just on this very simple motion data over time, can we detect and predict the onset of dementia or cognitive impairment? So by watching what you're doing at home, can we say that, you know what, in a year from now, this person may develop cognitive impairment. So you should perhaps go see your family doctor right now. So that's a brand new project that is just underway. Now, if a fall has been detected, we then use a dialogue manager, and this is the speech recognition. So the system would ask a series of yes and no questions to the person to determine how injured they are and who to call for help. And we use the exact same questions that a live operator would use right now if you call or if you push to your current PERS button or something else. So based on the person's responses to these questions or their lack of response, perhaps they're too injured or they're unconscious, whatever it may be, the system then places a call for help. Okay? So I'll show you a video now of the system working. We can chat about it a bit. So this is just kind of our scene camera here. This is what the system itself sees.
Hello, Mr. Smith. This is your automated health monitoring system. Do you need help? Please say yes or no.
Yes.
Would you like me to call an ambulance? Please say yes or no.
No.
Would you like me to call someone else to help you? Please say yes or no.
Yes.
There are 2 people on your contact list, your daughter Anne and your neighbor Paul. Would you like me to call your daughter Anne? Please say yes or no.
No.
Then I will call your neighbor Paul instead. Please say yes to confirm or no to be connected to an operator.
Yes.
I am calling your neighbor Paul now. Please wait, Mr. Smith. I will give you an update momentarily.
Okay, so that's an example of the way that the current prototype works. So essentially, you saw it asked a series of simple yes and no questions, and based on those responses, it goes through a decision tree to the point where it determines who to call. What we're working on now is a little more sophisticated dialogue management and speech recognition part. So right now it's based on yes and no questions. We want this to be far more natural. So we want the person to say, you know, help, I'm having chest pains, or whatever it may be. And then based on the words that the person's saying, the language they're using, and the tone of what they're saying, the system at that point can then classify it's a low, medium, or high level of risk. And the way we've done that is we've actually taken transcripts from Lifeline and from 911, and we've analyzed all the calls that older adults placed related to falls and other accidents that they're having. And based on all the transcripts that we analyzed, we pulled out all the keywords and all the phrases that they use, and then we classified those by asking various emergency room doctors on whether it's a low, medium, or high risk that the person is calling about. So we've taken all that information and we've now programmed into the next version of the system. So the person can say, help, I'm having chest pain, or, I've fallen and I've twisted my ankle. And based on that, then it'll classify who to call. Again, just making this a little less effort on the person to have to go through this dialogue. So we've done some initial pilot testing of the technology. We're getting right now to do a deployment in various seniors' homes in the downtown Toronto. But what I'll present here just very quickly is the work that we did in 2 homes of the research team. So we've taken the technology, we installed through our couple homes, and we simulated falls every single day. Now the critical thing in these trials was not to determine how well the system can detect falls. From what we've seen, it basically detects all falls as happen. What we want to see here, though, what would be happening throughout the day when falls are not happening? How many false alarms does the system have? Because again, if this technology every single day, every single hour is asking if you've fallen, you're going to get very annoyed again, you're going to throw the technology out. So it's a very cautious technology. It's very worrisome. It worries about you a lot. So what we found is, again, in terms of detecting falls, it was really, really good. Okay, 100% rate. But that past version did have false alarms about 5 times a day. 5 times a day, it was asking the person, have you fallen, are you okay? And now saying, I'm fine, and it was shutting itself off. This became very, my wife didn't appreciate these trials by the end of the 2 weeks. But, so what we're working on now is trying to fix those false alarms. And we've pretty much reduced them now to nothing. And the reason for this is because this kind of trial allowed us to identify specific situations that were causing these false alarms. And specifically, they allowed us to identify things that were happening that we could never have detected if we just did this in a lab, or even the home lab. Because there we cannot simulate real conditions. For example, one of the reasons in my house why the system kept going off is because it was installed in a room with a very large window. Okay? Outside that window was a very large tree. The tree was casting a shadow inside the room. That wasn't doing it. What would happen is when it was windy, the tree would shake, moving the shadow on the ground, which made it look like someone fallen, rolling around in pain on the ground. And this would set the system off. So again, if we never went ahead and did this real-world trial, even in my own house, we never would have discovered that is a source of false alarm. So it allowed us then to target that and to solve that problem. In the new version, we've also expanded fall detection outside the home as well. So what we've actually done is we've partnered with a local company called Gardley. And Gardley has made a mobile app that's on the iPhone, BlackBerry, Android phones, etc. And this is an emergency response app. And what you do is when you sign up for the Gardley service, you specify various call groups. So call group 1 may be your neighbor, your family member, and someone else. Call group 2 may be your doctor, your professional caregiver, 911, whatever, what it may be. And when you're out in the community, if you're in trouble, as soon as you push this app, you can tell it which call group to call, and they'll connect you, do a teleconference, and send text messages and emails to everyone just to coordinate a response. So we've partnered with them to allow our fall detection system to run on the same premise. So when our fall detection system goes off in the home, they'll now activate and call one of your call groups, again using that speech recognition. But if you're now out in the community, you can still have access to that same line of communication as well. So I presented to you a couple technologies now, and what I want to finish off to now is what's next. Where does this area need to go to continue to fulfill this whole notion of disruptive technologies and to change what's going on out there? And in my mind, one of the biggest things that we need to work on to make this area feasible and viable is this whole thing about integration of technology. When we talk about integrating all these various systems right now, which are typically built as standalone devices that you've seen here, we normally talk about, well, let's have a common way for the technology A to communicate with technology B. But if you go into someone's home, they're still all installed as individual units everywhere throughout the home. And again, they're visible, stigmatizing, and they just don't look very nice. They're still very expensive. So what we need to do is to still look at a better way of integrating all these technologies, so again, that they're all within my life, all built within my house, and they're not visible, and they're incorporated appropriately. So what I throw out there is a grand challenge. When I say it's a challenge, no one cares. When I say it's a grand challenge, people are like, ooh, it's a grand challenge. I'm going to listen to this. So it's a grand challenge. And what the grand challenge in this area, in my point of view, is that we need to take all these technologies and fully integrate the hardware infrastructure into the building itself. That is, the building material is the technology. No longer do we have individual units or devices installed here and there. As the house is being built, your technologies are being built at the same time. So for example, that we have this house here, and that every single brick is a microprocessor or a computer. So as you build your house up, the computer gets built up, the network gets built up, etc. You don't have any external devices, no external computer or anything that's running these systems. Instead of having a fall detection unit in every room, the entire ceiling is a fall detection unit. We have cameras or sensors that's built into the material itself that you can easily install, and you'll have this type of technology. As you walk across the floor, it's taking physiological measurements. It's taking your blood pressure, it's taking your heart rate, respiration rate, etc. Again, you don't have to remember to go hook yourself up to a blood pressure cuff or to do whatever. It's doing this on a daily basis, on a continuous basis. And use this whole notion of ambient displays and displays that wherever you are is providing information. You can talk to your doctor, your clinicians, your family members, no matter what. Whether you're watching television, you're in front of your computer, you're on your PDA, an iPad, or whatever it may be. It's all integrated. Now you're all looking at me like I'm nuts. I can see it in your eyes. Like, Alex, this is impossible. You don't know what you're talking about. So we've already started doing this. And I'm going to show you an example of what we've done so far. We've started looking at smart floor tiles. So that is a floor tile that can be installed in the bathroom. When I talk about smart floor tiles and all these things, I'm not talking about things that are thousands of dollars. My vision, my 15, 20-year vision is you can go to Home Depot, buy these floor tiles, and install them yourself, and you'll have your own smart home system. You don't have to do anything. It can be easy as that. So what our floor tile looks like is essentially some electrodes, some load cells, and various sensors built into it to measure some information. And I'm just going to talk very briefly about this. And what we're measuring from this floor tile is your heart rate, your blood pressure, and your respiration rate. And this is based on a concept called BCG, or ballistic cardiogram. Ever hear of BCG before? So BCG, or ballistic cardiogram, actually we discovered in a paper from the early 1920s. It's a very, very old concept. And it basically builds on your basic laws of physics. That says that as my heart pumps blood outwards, the force that it's using to pump outwards, I'll have an equal and opposite force being pushed out my feet onto the ground. So by us being able to measure that force that's being exerted by my body on the ground, which is BCG, we can then calculate your heart rate, your blood pressure, respiration rate, etc. So using that concept, and those graphs are really stinky, I apologize. What we're doing right now is over a 90-second period of you standing on this floor tile, we are able to measure your heart rate with an error rate of only about 1.5%. And this is that if I took a standard device that you'd use at your doctor to measure your heart rate, and we looked at our floor tile, we're pretty much correlating with that device. So what we're currently doing right now is expand this to look at blood pressure, which is a little more sophisticated for us to measure, and then respiration rate, which again is just a derivative of the BCG. And what you see here is essentially the BCG just looks like an ECG signal, as you would typically get if you go to your cardiologist or family doctor, etc. We are working very close with the Faculty of Architecture on this project because, again, we want to make this into a consumer product that anyone can use and install. And they're the experts in that area. Some of the architecture people are way out there in their ideas, but some of them are very practical, and those are the ones we're working with. So, again, this is me a floor tile hopefully you can easily install, and hopefully will become a reality relatively soon. So to finish off, hopefully I've shown you that we have made, I would say great strides. You may just say good strides. Great strides in the development of intelligent home systems for older adults, whether they have dementia or not, or any other kind of impairment. We've also collected data, we've published, we've shown that these systems can be effective in providing assistance to a user. However, what I have shown you have been developed just as standalone devices. They still are inherent to many of the limitations that I started off this presentation with. We are still victims of everything that I'm saying is wrong with this industry and what we need to work towards. But now I think there's an opportunity for us to move forward. This technology is cheaper now. 3 years ago, I would say none of these technologies are even feasible. Cameras are too expensive, computers too expensive, etc. Nowadays, that's not the problem. We can run all these technologies off of a simple gaming box like Xbox or the Wii or whatever may be out there. You can buy this for $200, $250. That's all the computing power we need to run the system. It is feasible. And this allows us to move in these new innovative directions and towards the integration of these technologies and reducing these various limitations. But more and more, these approaches now require further collaboration. It's just not the engineers, just not the computer scientists anymore. We need to work with the gerontologists, with the architecture people, with the social sciences. You know, I'm a perfect example of that. As was said, I'm an engineer working in an occupational therapy department. It's those kind of unique collaboration that you need to move this area forward. And we're starting to see that trend a lot more in this field, not just here at the university, but across North America and Europe as well. So I'm going to end it there. There's my contact information, our website if you want to learn more. If you're on Twitter, we tend to release all of our papers on Twitter and things like that as soon as they come out. And we have some time for questions, but again, feel free to contact me. We always look for new collaborators, partners, and people just interested, come to see what we do. So just feel free to drop me a phone call or an email, and we're happy then to meet with you guys.
Is there any thought on how to help? I'm thinking very frail seniors of communicating with the outside world, because isolation is one of the biggest, and depression.
Yeah. So there's a lot of work in this area around social isolation and technology. It's not a primary focus of our work, just because we know there's some very good research going on elsewhere. So for example, out in Oregon, at the Oregon Health and Sciences University, there's a large group there that's looking at that kind of issue as well. So it's one of those things that, you know, in the way that this area is trying to move is we're each kind of picking our unique area that we know we have our expertise in, and then bring it all together at the end of the day. But we've always said that communication has to be a key part of anything that we're developing that needs to be able to accommodate that down the road as well. There's actually also a professor here in computer science, Ron Becker, who does quite a bit of work on communication devices as well, for things like aphasia and seniors.
Are you receiving any sort of confidential funding for this experiment?
Yep. So this is all funded by grants. So the COACH project is being funded by CIHR, so Canadian Institute of Health Research, and by the American Alzheimer's Association. We have money from NSERC, which is the Natural Sciences Engineering Research Council. The Canadian Alzheimer's Association or Society has also funded our work in the past.
How about in the private sector?
Private sector has been tougher to get on board, just because the private sector in this area is so small still. So we tend, when we work with private sector, it tends to be far more in-kind contribution. So they'll give us equipment, they'll build things for us, give us, you know, input on the business side of things, whatever else. So for example, the robotics project that's being done with a company called Quanzer, which is a local robotics company, and they build all the robots for us, etc. So it tends to be a lot less cash from them. And that's one of our big struggles. So with our fall detection system, we're ready to move that out. We want to get that as a commercial product. You know, the patents have been granted, everything else. It's just we can't find a partner to come on board with us and take it on.
In your last slide where you're talking about collaborations, I think one of the important areas is collaboration with government/insurance as well as the healthcare sector. A few months ago there was a big meeting in Washington, which I'm sure you're aware of, dealing with all these e-health issues. And one of the resolutions was, yes, the technology is there and is moving in the right direction, and the major stumbling block will be the adaptation of the technology in the healthcare profession and reimbursement. For example, your floor tiles, they generate data. What's done with this data? If it goes to a physician, if it goes to a nurse practitioner, will they respond to the data? Absolutely. At this point, you can generate all the data you want. It still means you have to go and interact with healthcare professionals, and if they do not adapt to this, there's a big stumbling block.
Yep, absolutely. A couple months ago, I was in Kitchener at the Academy of Medicine, so I presented a bunch of MDs in the room. The first question that someone asked me is, how can they bill for using this technology? And at that point, I basically almost packed it in and walked out of the room.
But that's
it's a big problem.
That's the reality of it.
And when I talk to my colleagues in the U.S., that's always at the forefront of all their issues.
It is in the US more openly because of the private health insurance, but it is here too because everybody realizes the constraints of the money that's there, and a lot of this technology will be bought privately, like Lifeline, and there'll be tax incentives, but to have a general adaptation, to have it in every house, as you like to see it, it's gonna have to be underwritten by insurances.
And that's also one reason why we're trying to go with the whole notion of, well, how do we get rid of this whole medical device labeling and the cost that's associated with it? So for example, for fall detection, one model we're looking at is, it's not a fall detection system, it's a home security product. Right? When you leave your home, this system can still be running. If it sees someone walking your house when you're at home, it calls, the call center. But when you're home, well, lo and behold, it's also detecting if you fall it. And if we call it a fall detection system, we may have to charge $300 a unit. If we call it a home security product, we're starting at $100 a unit. Right? So I think there's also different models we can look at to get these technologies out. So for example, the floor tile, maybe it's not a healthcare product. It's a consumer piece of flooring tile that you can either pick marble or this one, to go in your bathroom kind of thing. And in this area, not just myself, but like I said, across North America and Europe, we're exploring that kind of approach as well. We're also exploring things around open access. So, the university hates when I say this, but a lot of us are not here to make money on this product. We know we're not going to make huge amounts of dollars on this. So why not just make it all open access and say, look, if you go buy a webcam and a microphone, and you plug them in this way, you can now just have our software for free. And you can have your own fall detection system for free. And in my mind, that seems to be more and more the better way to go in this area. Because if we want to have an impact, we need to get this in the hands of the user. If we need to continue to go through all this stuff that we currently do to get products and transfer, it's never going to get in their hands. And by the time it gets in their hands, it's going to be so outdated, it's not going to make a difference anyway. So I think there's a lot of interesting models we can explore, and so that a lot of us are starting to consider. We just need the support and the backing of academia and of industry, obviously, to do that. Right? So, Alan?
That last idea is interesting. If you make it open source, then you draw on the community of users and their support people to improve the technology.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to go back to your, you said you're developing the technology to detect changes in gait or movement to see if somebody will have dementia or.
Yep.
So can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Sure.
Like, would it be based on their movement patterns then?
Yeah, so right now, so there's quite a bit of research in that area where people have shown that if a person changes their patterns of active day living, so the actual completion of things, significant changes may indicate cognitive decline. Now, in order to collect that kind of data, though, you need sensors everywhere. You need every single cupboard door, fridge with a sensor, so we know if the person is eating, doing whatever else. And that could be, very difficult for most people to install at home. So what we have done with the Oregon group, we've obtained a data set that they've collected over 3 years of just motion sensor data. So they have a motion sensor in every single room, which typically, a lot of us would have as part of a home security system. So what we're trying to see is, based just on the motion patterns of the person and how long they spend in each room, is there a difference between a person who's cognitive intact and cognitive decline? So over the 3 years, they have 300 people that they collected this data from. And probably about half of them progressed from cognitive intact to mild cognitive impairment in year 3. So we're trying to see, well, first of all, if we take all the cognitive impaired people versus those who do not have cognitive impairment, is there a difference in this motion data? If we see yes, which hopefully we do, which I expect we will, at that point then we're going to see, well, how early before that 3-year mark is our technology showing that this person actually is starting to develop a cognitive impairment based on their change in motion? So we think, if this works out, it can be a very, very powerful diagnostic tool, obviously. So we'll see how it works out. It's a difficult project to do, especially because we're just going on the motion data. We don't know what they're doing in the room, right? So we'll see how it goes.
Couldn't this technology kind of work against those elders who want to stay in their house, in terms of if this technology is always going to be alerting their family members, and their family members already don't have a good understanding of how much of a deficit their parent has or whatever, and then that person doesn't want to leave their house, but now this technology is saying, no, it's not safe for you to be in your house.
Yeah.
How would you deal with that?
I totally agree with you. It's totally the dark side of this area. I don't have a good answer for you. I totally agree with you, and it is a possibility.
And if somebody's diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in advance, I mean, there's no, I wonder if you ask people, like, is there a demand for this knowledge that I'm going to develop Alzheimer's?
So that's an interesting question. So recently, there's been a lot of media around this, and a lot of, the statement is actually just being released, and it's a new campaign by the Alzheimer's Society of Canada, where essentially their campaign is the premise that if you find out you're going to develop Alzheimer's, yes, most of it, there's nothing you can do about it right now, but it allows you to prepare. And that's kind of the big campaign that's happening, preparing for the future, preparing for life with dementia or Alzheimer's disease. So based on that fact, there could be, some kind of usage of this technology.
It's pretty scary.
Absolutely. And it's a question I ask myself all the time. Like, if I had this own technology, do I want to know if I'm going to be developing this? And a big part of me says no. So I probably wouldn't even be a user of my own technology. I would admit that right now. But the hope is that down the road, that there is going to be things that's going to happen. And again, there are some research groups that have shown that doing things, as soon as a person is diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, that he can slow down the progression significantly by doing things like cognitive gaming. Something as simple as just playing solitaire has been shown in the literature to slow down cognitive decline. So, I'm sure advances like that can continue to develop, and hopefully will play more into the rationale of why we're doing this.
You've done this exploratory work with seniors, those who, are sort of reaching that age where frailty, reduction in sensory abilities, etc., are going to eventually affect their safety.
We tried to. It didn't go over well. And the reason for that is because it's the same thing we would all say, is that it's never going to happen to me, I don't need this, right? It's the same thing that says, like, well, I don't need eyeglasses, older people, I don't need eyeglasses, that's ridiculous. So we've actually run into that mentality. So what we actually did is we did a study that looked at the acceptance and potential use of this technology, and we compared current older adults with current baby boomers. And the current older adults were all very positive. Oh yeah, I can totally see myself using that, and I need that now. And all the baby boomers were, this technology is useless. There's no way, I don't need it.
So no going now.
Yeah. So it's interesting that we run into that barricade. Even though we think, well, we know that the ultimate uses of this technology is not going to be the current older adults. It's not going to be ready.
If we're really going to be proactive, I think that's where we need to focus, to start to embed technology and
exactly. And
get this universal design happening with people who are well and want to stay in their own home.
Absolutely, and that's the example I always say is, for us technology to be viable, we need to do this integration, we need to build into the home right away, so that, even if I don't have dementia or any kind of health problem, once in a while, it would be great if my house can tell me where my keys are. Right? And if you kind of build that kind of sensibility into that, this is a product for everyday use that just can remind you, and almost, instead of me carrying my iPhone with me and always having to check where I'm supposed to be, that these technologies are doing that for me automatically.
How about somebody making my tea?
That'd be the ultimate. Yeah. So if we kind of build that mentality into it, and then turn this away from being a healthcare product or a product for older adults, then I think the acceptability and obviously the cost is going to drop dramatically. There's Alan
and yet there's all sorts of difficulties around the ethics of a hyper-vigilant monitoring technology and the uses and abuses of all this data that gets generated. I'm not sure I'm comfortable would be in a house that knows what I'm doing and can potentially diagnose future illnesses before I know about it myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a nightmare to imagine that kind of information getting into the wrong hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often get that question more in the States as well. People ask me, what if my insurance company or my insurance get all the data?
Yeah.
So, we have to spend a lot of time around the whole security and privacy issue around that aspect. And that's why one thing one of the big aspects why we use artificial intelligence is that everything can be done within the home and still within the control of the user as much as possible. So a lot of technology right now collect data in the home, but then send it out somewhere where it gets analyzed. We don't send any data out of the home. The one thing that gets sent out of the home is a call for help. Right? And even there, the person will say, yes, call this person, or you have to be totally unconscious and not reply at all. So we've been trying to keep that aspect to kind of address that concern, but you're absolutely right. Like As many advances we've done in this area and kind of and beyond the technology. And normally I have this, I didn't put it in here, and my engineering students hate when I say this, but the engineering of this is easy. I can build you a better camera, I can build you a faster computer. It's these social and ethical implication questions, which are the tough things that no one is going to spend a lot of time on, and we really need to do, because it's not going to be the technology, it's going to be the barrier for this stuff getting out. It's going to be those kind of questions, right? So, the Europeans are far more advanced in looking at the social aspects of this technology than we are. They've done a lot of research over there, like in Sweden and stuff, looking at just those kinds of questions.
We've also got other disruptive technologies. Apparently the next wave in information technology is visual, where you can point your camera, your smartphone at someone's face, and all their information about them will be downloaded out in public. So you talked about invasion of privacy. So the whole cultural, the moral issues is just going to go kaboom.
Soon we're never going to be able to avoid anyone, right? Whether you want to avoid that person or not, it's not going to happen. So.
My question is there somebody else first? No? I'm a designer, architectural or interior designer, and I also have experience working as a nursing attendant in hospitals and old age homes and home for the senile, right? Whereas that's where I started when I was going through school. At this point, I'd like to sort of combine both of them, as you're talking about referencing different disciplines. Is there in your networking and your travels, is there a school or a course that is reputable and progressive that would include all these aspects that I could approach and look into?
Not that I see. You know, here at the university, we're trying to, in the occupational therapy program, I teach a course on assistive technology and design and all the kind of stuff I spoke about here. But that's a fairly unique course even across North America in terms of being in an OT department like that. Beyond that, I don't know. Alan, do you know of anything? Like you also have exposure in this area too. So
There is an age-in-place certification to do with design. And
yeah, there's certifications you can look
in
at.
the States.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if anything comparable is here in Canada.
Might be interested to talk to people like at the in North Carolina, the Center for Universal Design.
Yeah, I think we're looking at the certification program. I don't know even know if it's recognized.
Like I know a lot of places, like in architecture or even like at OCAD, so Ontario College of Art and Design, they tend to focus a lot more on healthcare problems for like their design projects and things like that. So it's starting to be embedded more. So every year I normally have a bunch of like OCAD design students come and talk to me about a particular healthcare problem that they're working on. And I know like this is of great interest to the people in faculty of architecture because they students need to do a fourth year thesis and they want to focus on older adults or aging or whatever else. So I know it's starting to be ingrained more, but not, I don't think formally yet into the programs. Great. Thank you very much, everyone.